Hello and welcome to another Tom's Talk. We're calling it a Tom's Talk because we have Thomas Price, who's with us from an institute. It's actually called Our Towns, Our City Institute. And Tom, you're an advocate for good things in our city. My name is John
Always.
Lindsay. I'm here from Friendly to Seniors in CARP. And also as a full disclaimer, I'm also a member of the Institute as well, too. So Tom, we're going to talk about fire.
Sounds good to me.
Fire is something that really us humans have benefited from immensely, but it's also something very dangerous. Can destroy your building, can destroy your life. And that's why we have firefighters. We're going to be talking about firefighters today. It's been in the news quite a bit lately. There's been some concern about the number of firefighters we have. There's a concern about a young individual who died, unfortunately, and some say it's because a nearby fire station did not respond in time. We can talk about that a little bit later on. But first of all, let's talk about firefighters. There's two different types of firefighters. A lot of people, don't really think too much about firefighting. Although as a kid, most of us wanted to become firefighters. And there's volunteers and there's full-time firefighters. What is the difference?
Well, there's actually three types of firefighters. There's the career, which that is their occupation, that is their profession.
Mhm.
They make a living as firefighters. There's what we call volunteers, and the volunteers within the city they get a remuneration for each fire they attend and for training.
Okay.
But there's also true volunteers, which do not get paid and do not belong to city employment ranks.
These would be
We
people in smaller rural communities. Is that right?
Yes, the more remote areas, and we do have at least one of those on the east side of Lake Wanapitei.
Hmm.
They have their own fire pumps, and it takes about an hour for any of the organized fire trucks to get there. And by that time, there's not much left to
No,
do
no, no.
except, so, and they are
Well,
true.
in the past, it's true that fire station was almost the center of the community, and just not the firefighters, the volunteers, but the whole family was almost involved.
Yes, that's true. Many communities, the fires, well, in some communities, for example, the one in Coppercliff was a social center as well as a fire response center. Uh, and that's not unusual in most small towns. So yeah, it's a social thing too, definitely.
But here in Sudbury, we have career firefighters. Another term is, I believe, professional. But is there any difference in qualifications between career, professional, and a volunteer firefighter?
No, the qualifications for a class one or a class two firefighter are identical, regardless of who you work for. For example, Glencore has firefighters on staff, and they are equally qualified as the city firefighters, and the volunteer firefighters can be equally qualified. The qualifying is not where you work. You get qualified under the National Fire Protection Association. And I think there's something like 47 different classifications.
Now, this association is it determine who is really qualified? Are there tests that are taken for both the
Ab-
volunteers and the career firefighters?
Absolutely. And you don't get your classification unless you do pass the requirements for that.
And you could become, if you're a volunteer, you could also become a career person as well too if you apply.
Yes. As I say, that is purely a term of employment.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with your qualifications.
Now, the number of firefighters that we have in the city of Sudbury, which is the amalgamated city, of course, and behind me you can see the map of Sudbury. We cover a very, very large area. But in the center of the city, what's called the old city, we have four stations: Lockerbie Station, a station in New Sudbury, station in Middle Lake, and of course the main station downtown, which are all staffed by career professional firefighters. And we have the other station that is sort of a hybrid, I guess you'd call it. It's out in Valtorez, and you see it on our little map here. Now they are sort of sort of a mixture, but there's been some controversy lately about, are they going to be a two-person station, a four-person station, or is it going to be a combination of volunteers or all volunteers? This has sort of been up in the air lately. Can you sort of give us some background and the actual numbers of how many people are actually employed, if it's a two-person or four-person or volunteer combination? Or, I'm confused, and I guess a lot of other people in the community are as well. Can you elaborate on that sort of in a simple way?
Yeah, the composite station with two-person composite station is just the ones that are at the station. To have those career firefighters there requires a complement of 8 career firemen or fire responders, firefighters,
Mm-hmm.
plus 15 volunteers. Okay. If you have a 4 career person station, it requires 16 career firefighters plus 15 volunteers. Okay. So uh, it isn't the way it sounds. Like a two career person composite station is actually an 8-person composite station
Mm-hmm.
because there are 8 employees there, career employees. So that affects your cost dramatically.
So what's happened is that there's a suggestion of going up to 4 in the Valtorez station, which would mean that besides the 8 already to make the complement of 2 on duty all the time, then how many more would you require to come up to the 4?
Another 8. So
Mm-hmm.
you would have 16 career people dedicated to that station.
But there's
Plus,
also some volunteers associated as well.
oh yes, there's a minimum of 15, and with only 2 career there's probably 20 volunteers required. Um, you need for a full response to a fire, you need 15 firefighters. If you only have 2 from career, then you need 13 volunteers. If you have 4 from career, then you need 11 volunteers. To get that number of volunteers requires an overage on the number of volunteers available.
But there's down in the downtown section, there are 4 stations downtown. There's no volunteers associated with them. Is that correct?
I understand there's some that work there, but they're not, it's not part of the contingent, the
Mm-hmm.
complement.
So are stations that in the downtown, just to clarify this, the stations in the downtown area, Lockerbie, Mineral Lake stations, and also LaSalle, they would have this complement of 4 all the time, which is really translates into 16. And
Yes.
how about for the downtown station? That would have the same?
The downtown station actually has 47.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask the question, what are they all doing? But
I
I
don't
guess
know.
I guess.
Well, some of them are relief for the other career stations. Okay. And
and
that's why
and
you,
there's safety officers too, isn't that correct?
yes. Uh, I don't know the distribution within the number 1 station. All I know is there's 47 career firefighters at station number 1, which is the Van Horn one.
Mhm.
And
Just going back out to Valtrez just for a moment here.
yep,
So there have been some people in the valley had indicated that they'd be okay with a totally volunteer station out there. How would that affect the fire service in that area? If I'm living in the area out there, Blizzard, Valcarra, someplace, and there's a fire at my business or my home, how can I expect that I'm going to be adequately serviced response?
well, you'll get the same service. There may be a couple of minutes delay over the career being there full time, but for example, during most days, you'll have volunteers at the station anyway, and a lot of the evenings and nights. But it's basically a matter of response time, which is less important in today's world than it was in the past.
Why is that?
Well, in the past, for example, a residential fire was safely, the building was usually safe to enter 20 minutes after ignition. Today's modern homes, after 3 to 5 minutes, the building is no longer safe to enter.
Mhm.
So you can't possibly, from point of ignition, there's no way possible that you can get a fire response team there in 3 minutes.
Talking about response time, and this is what we talked about earlier at the very beginning, the Cape Rail
Yes.
station well equipped to handle a fatal crash, and apparently they weren't called, and as a result, a young individual died. And there's no guarantee that if the Cape Rail station had been notified that he had been saved, but nonetheless, there was some delay in getting another station, which is further away. So is there some problem with protocol, or they're not sure that that station could handle the job? Yeah, I'm just a bit confused.
You're not alone. Everyone is. Uh, Typically, in almost all fire stations across North America, the policy is closest station is the first call out. Okay. That doesn't apply in our city anymore. And I can't explain why not, because when you don't know what the true incident is until you get there, the first station should always be the first call out, because you have no idea what you're going to be running into. You may have nothing to respond to, or you may have a conflagration of fire combined with jaws of life extrication. You may have all those things, but you don't know until somebody gets there.
Mhm.
So your first station to respond can assess all that and call for help, or you can call out 2 or 3 stations at once if you think it's bad enough.
Mhm. I can recall I was down into the States a few years ago in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and the hotel I was staying in had a fire, and
Mhm.
a truck arrived almost immediately, and within a few minutes later, all the trucks, I think, from all over the territory arrived. And of course, it was a possibility of a hotel fire. But I was amazed, and these are all volunteer people. I was really amazed at just how quickly this happened. Now, going back in time, you can see our map here. There are fire stations located all over Sudbury, and they're still there. But we had a very effective fire response situation from all of these stations, as I understand. Is there,
Mhm.
what is the current goal now? It seems that we sort of have to reinvent the wheel.
I can't really answer that other than uh, we're seeing our outer stations, the ones in the ones away from the major city, uh, having a decimation of the volunteer responders in those stations. Uh, the maintenance of those stations has fallen into disrepair, and that's been the case for many years. Uh, we've had situations where equipment from those stations are taken to replace equipment in the city core where the career stations are. So what the plan of the fire services itself is very, very murky to most people in the city. It may be clear to the ones running it, but it sure isn't to the people.
Now, before we go on any further, we've booked ourselves for half an hour here. We're about halfway through, but for those who aren't going to stay with us any further, is there any easy solution to this? Have you thought about this with respect to, because you've been studying it for some time, and both of us have been around for some time. Uh, is there any way that we can sort of work our way through this somehow?
Oh, yes, very simply. And what has happened over the years, there's been a tremendous amount of toxicity in the fire department between the career and the volunteers. And that was first noted in about 2014, highlighted again in 2015, and it's never been cured, and it may never be cured with the setup that we have. So the simple solution that I just mentioned is very simple, is you create a second fire department. You have one fire department for career fire department or fire stations, and you have a volunteer fire department for the volunteer stations. Separate fire chief for both departments. Separate management of the resources in each department. It is literally run as two separate departments, with the exception that common things like purchase equipment, salaries and wages and that type of thing would be the common administration in the community safety department. But when it comes to actual fire response, it would be the responsibility of the two fire chiefs, who incidentally are by a provincial law supposed to report directly to council, not to the administration. They have
So,
that responsibility.
so these two separate, would that result in additional costs? I mean, talking about additional costs, we know in the Valtrez situation that we're looking at these additional firefighters that would make up the 4-person complement or the 16-person complement. You're looking at, I know that I've been reading that estimates could be anywhere from $1 million to $1.5 million extra a year, which would be added to the tax base. Are we getting value for money? I know most of us, ordinary taxpayers are always concerned about cost benefit. Is this extra money going to give us a better service, or is it
Not really for fire. What has happened over the years is our career fire departments and indeed most of the fire departments are responding to a lot more than just fires. There's false alarms, there's medical aid, there's car accidents. And so that makes it look as if you're a lot busier than you really are for fire response. The question, of course, comes up, do you really need fire responding to every car accident? Obviously, the answer is no. And in fact, quite a few cases in our city, the accident is cleared up and the crashed vehicles have already gone to the collision center before fire gets there. So there's some really fine-tuning cost improvements that could be made.
Now, there's been some talk as well too about the use of EMS, emergency services, and also the police. And there seems to be some degree for some people of confusion with respect to the coordination that takes place there. I know some of us who witness accidents, we're never sure who's going to show up. Is it going to be the ambulance? Is it going to be the police? Is it going to be the fire department? Is there any real coordination that takes place there?
I share your question. Quite often, it doesn't appear that there is any good coordination. For example, as I just mentioned, a fender bender accident, if you call it in, the police will ask you a few questions and they'll tell you to, well, you don't need us there, go directly to the collision center. However, the fire truck will still show up. Now, why? Will the ambulance show up? No, but the fire truck will. So you have to question, what is the dispatching system that forces that fire truck to arrive when the police have said they don't even need to go to the scene?
Well, that's sort of an administrative area, I would imagine, and the directions. But going back to what you talked about before with respect to the volunteer, a chief for the volunteers and a chief for the career, this would basically, wouldn't this sort of divide our city in a sense that, well, let's say Valtrez went to whole volunteers. So this would mean the general outlying area, those areas on our map behind me here, would be serviced by volunteers, and the central part of the city would be serviced by career people. Is this workable?
Yeah, absolutely. All it means is that both departments, when needed in the other department area, the other fire district, and called on, they have to respond. For example, if a career station in the center core calls fire for a volunteer station to respond, they have to respond. It's a mutual aid situation. And similarly, if someone if a station in the volunteer area needs career to respond as well, all they have to do is put in the call and they respond. That's mandatory by provincial law. So why would it be any different than it is now?
So you're
and by the way, just going back to your point a little bit earlier, you indicated that the dispatching was an administration issue. No, it's not. It's a managing issue. There's a big difference between administration and managing.
Now, would be Now, you alluded to, and I think most of us know that there's been some conflict between, and maybe it's because there's two unions involved here. We have the professional career union, and we have the volunteer union. And is there a situation about, is it raiding taking place, or is it, I'm not sure if I should use that term, empire building, but what is actually going on politically with respect to these unions?
I don't know, and I wouldn't even hazard a guess, but I do know that the one way to cure it is to separate the managing of the two unions. Having them both managed by the same hierarchy, the natural tendency is to promote career into the managing positions.
Mhm.
Okay, because they're there, they've been there full time. They're full-time employees, whereas the volunteers aren't. So, but if you have a fire chief of volunteers, he knows his men, he knows his capabilities. When a job opens up in the higher levels, they can bid on those permanent jobs
Mhm.
within the volunteer organization. Okay, so there increases opportunity for volunteers tremendously.
Now, when it comes to recruiting, the chief of the volunteers and the chief of the career, they would be involved in the actual recruiting for their own particular area. Is that correct?
Yes,
Now, there seems to be some difficulty. We're told, through from the city, that it's very difficult to get volunteers. There's some reason we don't see this difficulty in other areas of the province or the country. It seems like, well, everybody wants to be a fireman, but that doesn't seem to be the case here uh, in Sudbury. Is it just because of the atmosphere?
absolutely, without any question. They won't admit it. In fact, Joe Nichols at the last meeting indicated that the two groups are working together amicably now. Well, that may be the surface picture, but it certainly isn't the undertow. So,
Yeah. Well, there was an arbitration, uh, non-binding, but an arbitration that there should be 4 people at the Bell Therese station, or 16, as to be to have a full complement. Uh, I don't understand just how this came up. But well, yeah, I'm having difficulty trying to talk about it. Even help me out here, Tom.
okay, well, first of all, the arbitration ruling wasn't about 2 or 4 career responders. It was supposedly about safety of the 2 career responders in that station. And that safety issue was when they arrive at a fire with only 2 responders on the truck, it isn't safe for them to execute a rescue or to attack the fire. Okay, that's what the issue was about. However, it got turned into a 2 versus 4 responder issue. And that's a false issue. If you look at the International Association of Firefighters, of which our career firefighters are a member of, they studies that they have done on live fires clearly point out that 2 or 4 are not safe. In fact, having 4 going out with the truck, believing that it's safe for them to execute a rescue or attack the fire, is actually more dangerous than our current system at the city, where we require 7 to arrive on scene before you can execute a rescue. Judgment would tell you, and they have authority and license to exercise judgment if they deem it safe enough to go in and do a rescue with 4 or 5. But that's a matter of judgment call for the person directing the fire response.
No,
Does that answer it?
well, I think so. No, in theory, at the present time, with 2, they are then supplemented by the volunteers. So it's possible
Absolutely.
to get up to the 7 or 10 or however many is required to do an entry or various different firefighting functions.
Yes. Yes. And very quickly, because as soon as the volunteers arrive, as soon as your number's up to 7,
Mhm.
you're good to go on anything. Now, during that time that you're waiting, the crew is laying out their hoses. They're doing all the preparatory work to fight the fire. Okay. Uh, with 4, believe it or not, 4 is only half as effective as 6. And 4 instead of 6 increases your injury level times 3. So 4 is not an answer for safety. In fact, it leaves those 4 with the impression that they can safely do things that they can't do. And if they do effect an entry or anything else, they're so tired by the time the others get there that you're down to, instead of having 15 responders, you lose those 4 and you're down to 11. That increases the danger for the other 11.
Now, but in the city itself, with our 4 stations in the central core, each of those don't have 4 people. So when they go out, there's 4. So they have to be supplemented by the other stations in order to get to the required level.
No, they have to call out their extra people. Now, whether those people are in station 1 or where they are, I don't know how they supplement it.
But obviously,
overtime comes into it.
Well, this is a very complex subject and we're almost running out of time, but I think that the basic concern of all of us individuals who have home property and business property is we want our properties to be protected. We want quick response. We're not disparaging either the volunteers or the career firefighters, but we're just wondering, you know, we don't want this aminosity to continue, and we want the best cost benefit that, you know, that we can get as ordinary citizens. And
well, that's only part of the question, though, John. Our city is not in compliance with the Fire Act of Ontario. They're not in compliance with the city fire bylaw. They ignore the recommendations of the Fire Marshal's office, which reports to the Solicitor General's office. They're not in compliance with the Municipal Act, and they're making decisions like this outside of the legislated and policy requirements of all of those organizations. That is not in the best interest of any of us, either in the city or out in the rural and urban areas, urban areas.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. It almost sounds like these are political decisions rather than based on requirements and fact.
The ones that are being made? Absolutely. I mean, all of those enactments and legislation are there for safety reasons. How can you not pay attention to them? Only by political will.
Right. Well, the answer, we're not exactly sure, but you've presented one alternative is the chief for both the volunteers and also one for the professionals, and also to have a report directly to council, and that this requires just more than what we've been doing now, is more or less patchwork.
Absolutely. And council has to take responsibility for their duty under all of that legislation. They have not been doing that. So
we've laid it out there to a degree. Obviously, you know, that requires a lot more than just a half-hour talk here. But I think we've brought, thank you, Tom Price, for bringing this issue to this Tom Talk here, which we've done a number of previously. And of course, we invite comments as well, too. We'll be posting this video, sending it out to those that we have on our list of recipients, and also on our Friendly to Seniors website, which is very simply friendlytoseniors.ca. And because we like to be friendly.
Good idea.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Tom, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.